If you're a small or medium-sized business owner, you really want to make sure that you understand the complexities of a government investigation and how easily decisions on the job can lead to criminal charges for white-collar crime. After the pandemic, of course, the government released trillions of dollars in stimulus funds, but some unscrupulous business people made some decisions that they may not have fully understood how easily they can be brought into the web of both a government investigation and a criminal charge. And for that reason, we've created this case study on COVID economic relief fraud. So I'd like to read from you this article that our colleague wrote to help more people understand the origins of an investigation and what should people know about them. So here's the situation on COVID fraud. According to the DOJ, people have taken more than $80 billion in COVID-related relief loans under false pretenses. So it should not surprise anyone that government investigations into COVID relief fraud are on the rise. In a recent press conference, Attorney General Merrick Garland reinforced the DOJ's commitment to prosecuting anyone who would exploit a national emergency to steal taxpayer-funded resources. In fact, the Project on Government Oversight, called POGO, just published a detailed review titled Red Flags: The First Year of COVID Relief Fraud Cases. The review concludes that the government has just scratched the surface in identifying and prosecuting COVID relief fraud. According to reports, thousands of COVID-related loans are already flagged for further investigation. So far, the DOJ Criminal Division has filed more than 125 fraud cases involving the PPP, Paycheck Protection Program, and the EIDL, Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. Of the $625 million that the DOJ has seized or forfeited so far, about $445 million involves PPP or EIDL loan fraud. Law enforcement observers agree that the rest of 2021 will bring a significant wave of criminal cases involving PPP and EIDL loan fraud. Civil enforcement will also play an important tool going forward. Therefore, anyone participating in the PPP, EIDL, or similar COVID-related economic relief programs should understand the scope of the government's enforcement efforts. And if you feel as though you may be a target of this type of an investigation, you should consider what steps can you be taking right now to mitigate these problems and to lower your vulnerability to a criminal charge. So let's look at the current environment of COVID fraud. The risk of investigations and prosecutions related to COVID economic relief fraud is rising. Together with the DOJ, other government watchdogs are ramping up their efforts. The PPP and EIDL loan programs could end up accounting for about $1 trillion in COVID relief loans. Such massive programs are bound to require significant government oversight for years to come. The federal government has several years to investigate and prosecute loan fraud before the statute of limitations expires. So this is going to be an ongoing issue given the fact that the government has released trillions of dollars. With more than 125 criminal fraud cases on file, the red flags for loan fraud are evident. These include inflated payroll numbers to qualify for larger PPP loans, shell companies, defunct companies, and bogus companies applying for PPP or EIDL loans, loans proceeds diverted for personal use, including private planes, luxury travel, and sports cars, loan applications in the existing legitimate companies with falsified ownership information, and loan applications using stolen identities or aliases. President Biden and Vice President Harris, their administration, is determined to shore up preventative and investigative efforts. According to a February White House press release, this administration seeks to reduce waste, fraud, and abuse across all federal programs, especially the PPP and EIDL loan programs. For this reason, PPP loan guarantee approval is now contingent on businesses passing SBA fraud checks and Treasury's do not pay database. Also, the SBA will perform manual loan reviews for the largest loans in the PPP portfolio and a random sampling of other loans. Loan applications are more likely to be held for further investigation now. Of course, even after a PPP or EIDL loan is approved and funded, applicants can be subject to criminal charges should a later investigation reveal fraud. Background and analysis on COVID relief fraud. On March 29, 2020, Congress passed the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, the CARES Act. This was the very first emergency measure offering financial assistance to millions of Americans suffering the devastating economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Since then, Congress passed 2 additional economic relief packages. PPP is a signature component of the CARES Act. The PPP offered forgivable loans so small businesses could keep employees on their payrolls during the pandemic. In total, Congress allocated $850 billion in forgivable PPP loans. Congress allocated many more billions to additional loan programs. Individually, Americans also received direct economic injury payments and enhanced unemployment benefits. So here's the criminal enforcement on COVID fraud. Reports of fraud and abuse began to surface soon after the initial wave of PPP and other economic relief became available. In one Texas case, Denise Saw applied for 15 PPP loans using 11 different companies and received more than $17 million in fraudulent loans. Saw used the money intended to help struggling small businesses to purchase real estate and other personal luxuries. He pleaded guilty to 1 count of wire fraud and 1 count of money laundering. He awaits sentencing and faces up to 30 years in prison. A federal district court judge will determine any sentence after considering the U.S. sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. Now, the U.S. sentencing guidelines are complicated to understand. Judges must consider the federal sentencing guidelines when assessing how much time to impose as a sanction for the offense. The guidelines will consider many factors, including the severity of the offense on an objective, vertical scale and the person's criminal history. The federal sentencing guidelines will include a grid with intersecting points that define the sentencing range. Besides the crime itself, other factors such as loss amounts can influence the sentencing judge. Judges may even consider esoteric terms like relevant conduct. Since the guidelines are only advisory rather than mandatory, each individual should work to create an extensive mitigation strategy to influence the judge. As long as the judge considers specific factors, the judge may vary from the sentencing guideline range, either going higher or lower than the punishment range that the guideline recommended. Another case involves Stephen Smith of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Smith illegally received more than $600,000 in PPP loans. According to a plea agreement, Smith submitted fraudulent applications on behalf of 3 different companies, making misleading statements regarding payroll expenses. Smith faces a sentencing hearing in July and faces up to 30 years in federal prison. Francis Joseph, a physician in Colorado, is charged with having exploited PPP and other COVID relief programs. Joseph is charged with misappropriating almost $300,000 in loan proceeds and making false statements in connection with bankruptcy proceedings. According to court documents, Joseph diverted $118,000 that the government provided to the medical clinic where he worked. He spent the money on personal travel and home improvements. Joseph also diverted $180,000 from a PPP loan, then falsified documents claiming bankruptcy on behalf of the medical clinic that received the PPP loan. Joseph faces charges of theft in connections with healthcare and theft of government property, and each one of those charges carries up to 10 years in prison. In addition, Joseph is charged with wire fraud and false statements on a bankruptcy proceeding, and each of those carries up to 5 years in prison. These representative cases indicate that the government is prepared to use all the tools at its disposal to file substantial criminal charges where it sees PPP and EIDL loan fraud. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end of this case study. So, civil enforcement on COVID fraud. POGO's Government Oversight study also highlights the power of civil enforcement in the fight against PPP and EIDL loan fraud. In civil enforcement cases, the burden of proof is much lower for the government than in criminal cases, making those types of cases even easier to win. Among the various statutes the government can use in civil cases is the False Claims Act. Under this law, either the government or private whistleblowers can initiate civil enforcement actions. Whistleblowers can receive a monetary reward in successful cases. The availability of civil enforcement by private individuals significantly expands the tools for holding individuals accountable. The DOJ has already announced plans to bring more false claim acts cases to fight against COVID-related loan fraud. This past January, it obtained the first settlement for fraud against online retailer Sidebelts Incorporated and Brigham Taylor, the company's president and CEO. The company and the president agreed to pay $100,000 in damages and penalties to resolve allegations that they committed PPP loan fraud. Sidebelts also repaid the PPP funds it received, and more civil enforcement actions like this one are on the way. So there are lessons to be learned in all of this, of course, that, basically we have to kind of consider that the government is looking to make all citizens effectively ambassadors of the Department of Justice. They want this policy that says if you see something, say something, otherwise you may face your own charges for willful blindness, saying you either knew or you should have known what was going on. And the more we understand about this, the more we can protect ourselves against these types of allegations. I can't tell you how many people that have reached out to us, to our firm, looking for assistance, saying that they didn't understand they were breaking the law, or they didn't know they were supposed to do something, but now they're on their way to federal prison. So because we encounter so many of these people, we create this type of content with hopes of helping you. That's kind of the model behind the message behind our motto of we did the time so you won't have to. So COVID fraud scrutiny, there's a lot of it. Because in addition to the DOJ criminal and civil divisions, the government may deploy other resources to investigate COVID-related fraud. For example, financial institutions are required to file suspicious activity reports. According to GAO, the Government Accounting Office, 2,300 financial institutions reported more than 41,000 instances of suspicious activities related to PPP and EIDL loan fraud between May and October of 2020. Suspicious activity reports go to FinCEN at the Treasury Department, where they can be flagged for further investigation and enforcement. Suspicious activity reports related to possible small business loan fraud are now higher than usual. Various inspectors generals are also watchdogs for fraud. For example, the FDIC and the Office of the Inspector General was actively involved in the $17 million fraud case that we mentioned earlier against Dinesh Shah in Texas. The FDIC OIG has vowed to vigorously investigate any attempts to defraud the PPP and other crimes against its financial institutions. Activity is also on the rise at the Small Business Administration's Office of Inspector General. This office currently investigates more than 200 PPP and EIDL loans for possible fraud, and this trend will likely continue and grow. So here's our recommendation. The federal government is increasingly focused on COVID-related loan fraud, and as such, PPP and EIDL loans are under more scrutiny than ever. Multiple agencies can take action, including the Department of Justice criminal and civil divisions, as well as Inspector General offices like the SBA or FDIC and FinCEN at the Treasury Department. Private civil enforcement actions are also possible. So this case study highlights how many government agencies are focusing on combating COVID-related loan fraud. These agencies have many tools at their disposal. Therefore, the stakes have never been higher for anyone under investigation or prosecution for PPP, EIDL, and related loan fraud. The defendants in the criminal cases highlighted above are awaiting sentencing. As with any person that violates the law, significant personal and financial consequences follow. Loss of personal freedom, time, and family with financial resources represents part of the sanction. Collateral consequences also follow, such as lost earning power in the job market. If facing any type of government investigation or prosecution, people should learn more about options and consider crafting a mitigation strategy to help stakeholders understand more about their intentions, their character, and efforts to make things right. In fact, earlier I wrote about the federal sentencing guidelines, and I told you that those are only advisory. They're not mandatory. So as a result, every individual should be thinking about what can I do to advance prospects for liberty at the soonest possible time. And they got to think about every different stage, whether it's at the time of when authorities are investigating you, when authorities charge you, when authorities, if there's a plea, when you're going to go through a pre-sentence investigation report, when you're going to be before the sentencing hearing, when you're going to be in prison and you need to be advocating for yourself, when you come home and you're going to try to get a higher level of liberty, or when you're going to try and recalibrate your life as a law-abiding, contributing citizen. We have an enormous amount of depth and breadth of experience in this subject, and we give you a lot of free information on our various websites at compliancemitigation.com, prisonprofessors.com, all of our YouTube channels, and we definitely want to help you make better decisions. I am Michael Santos with Prison Professors. Well, I guess I'm making this for compliancemitigation.com. So just want you to be aware, everything may be going well in your life right now, but you've got to be thinking about the complexities of how every single decision can lead to a government investigation. And I want to thank our team at Prison Professors for helping us produce this content. Thank you. Oh, one other thing. Please make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you like us on Facebook, and you visit us so that you can get more free information to help you make better decisions.